Hello viewers, you're watching the CrossMoto channel. You can count the number of production motorcycles with 6-cylinder engines on your fingers. 2 hands are plenty. This is explained by the fact that it's much easier to use power units with fewer cylinders for motorcycles because they are simpler, more compact, and cheaper. But sometimes certain motorcycle companies delight fans of two-wheeled machines with masterpiece motorcycle models. One of these masterpieces is the Honda CBX 1000 with an inline 6-cylinder engine. Let's take a closer look at this machine and find out what led to the appearance of the 6-cylinder from Honda. What kind of performance could the CBX 1000 boast? And why did this motorcycle fail to live up to expectations? Enjoy watching. So friends, let's start by figuring out what events led to the appearance of the CBX 1000. And to properly understand the situation, we need to provide a bit of historical context. In the early post-war years, the talented Japanese mechanic and engineer Satoru Honda started making lightweight motorcycles. In 1948, his small company was reorganized and received the name Honda Motor Company. We won't go into the many details of the company's development. For those who are interested, in this 1-hour episode, I talked in more detail about the history of Honda. For this story, we just need to know a few facts. In the 1950s, Honda's rapid growth was driven by its machines' quality, reliability, and simplicity. By 1959, Honda Motor Company was already the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. But in terms of engine displacement, the Japanese still couldn't match the British Norton, Birmingham Small Arms Triumph, the American Harley-Davidson, or the German BMW. In the 1960s, Honda entered motorcycle racing and advanced its technology. Since Satoru was a passionate fan of 4-stroke engines and hated 2-strokes, multi-cylinder engines were needed to compete with the 2-stroke racing motorcycles from Yamaha and Suzuki. The highlight in 1966 was a 250cc motorcycle featuring 6 inline cylinders. The racing model was the RC 166. This racing machine did not achieve much success since in 1967, the Moto Grand Prix regulations changed, limiting the number of engine cylinders to 4. In 1969, the first superbike from Honda, the CB750, made its debut to the general public. The concept of building a motorcycle to exceed the British industry emerged in the mid-60s. In 1967, Bob Hansen, manager at American Honda Motor Company, persuaded Soichiro that their flagship king of motorcycles should have an inline-4 engine instead of the large V-twin Honda was developing. The CB750 was faster than rivals, introduced 4-cylinder engines to the masses, and was the first production motorcycle with disc brakes. However, the competitors were not asleep. Soon, the more powerful Kawasaki Z1 would appear, and then the race for speed and performance would only intensify. In the early 70s, Honda engineers were thinking about new concepts for a flagship motorcycle. The excellent touring machine, the Honda Goldwing, was being developed. At the same time, the first prototype, designated M1, was equipped with a 6-cylinder Boxer engine, but the first production models ended up with a 4-cylinder. Another idea was the desire to create an excellent sports motorcycle, paying tribute to the racing models of the 60s. That's how the CBX 1000 model would appear, and I think now it's clear why there are inline engines and inline 6. I'll note the fact that the CBX 1000 was not the first production civilian motorcycle with an inline 6. Honda was beaten by the Italian Alejandro De Tomaso from Benelli with the Benelli 750C model, which debuted in '72. Want to hear something funny? The Benelli 6 was based on the 4-cylinder Honda CB 500 engine, but let's save Benelli for another episode and return to the CBX 1000. The new superbike project from Honda was brought to life under the guidance of designer Shuichiro Irimajiri. At the time of the CBX debut, he was 38 years old. In the 60s, when Seiichiro was in his early 20s, he worked on racing multi-cylinder Hondas, particularly on the 6-cylinder RC 166. This experience enabled the CBX 1000 to be ready in only a year and a half, all thanks to the already refined engine concept. The 6-cylinder superbike from Honda was officially unveiled in December 1978. Its engine was a masterpiece, an inline air-cooled 4-stroke 6-cylinder engine with 1047cc displacement, built with racing technology. Dual overhead camshafts with 4 valves per cylinder. This engine produced 105 horsepower at a maximum of 9,000 revolutions per minute and 85 newton meters of torque at 8,000 revolutions per minute. A 5-speed gearbox was integrated into the same unit as the engine. The potential was enough to accelerate the 250-kilogram motorcycle up to 225 kilometers per hour, and the CBX reached its first 100 from a standstill in 4.6 seconds. And how does it sound? It's divine?
The sound of the engine.
When development started on the Supersport prototype, several engines were considered: an inline 4 of 1000 or 1200 cc and a 6-cylinder of 1050 so. Ultimately, Honda's designers and management chose the final option. Fitting a 585mm wide unit into the frame was a headache. The problem was solved by narrowing the crankcase and creating more space by tilting the engine forward by 30 degrees. The Honda 6 was actually just a bit wider than the CB754. Initially, Honda Motor Company positioned the CBX model as a supersport, including for participation in races. From 1979 to 1980, Honda entered CBX models in the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy competition. However, there was one incident that drew attention: an excellent power unit, which could be boosted up to 130 horsepower if desired, was installed in a chassis that wasn't the most outstanding. For racing, the CBX had an admittedly weak frame, brakes, and suspension, which didn't allow the model's sporting potential to be fully realized. The 1979 model was the CBXZ. In 1980, it got a new look and cylinder head settings, increasing output to 103 horsepower of power. The model was called the CBXA, since the CBX didn't perform very well in races, and it was unacceptable to lose face. In 1981, Honda reclassified the CBX 1000 as a sport touring model. From 1981, the motorcycle received the CBXB designation. The ergonomics and overall dimensions changed, and now it's a full-fledged sport tourer with a plastic fairing and side cases. Weight rises by 40 kilograms. Engine power falls to 100 horsepower. Fuel tank capacity grows. The rear suspension gets the ProLink progression and is equipped with a pneumatic monoshock instead of the 2 shock absorbers used in previous versions. 1982 becomes the last year of production for the CBX 1000. The only external difference from last year's model was the presence of a plastic handle behind the passenger seat. Factory CBXC. The CBX 1000 was an export motorcycle and was aimed at the United States and Western European markets. Although the engine was a masterpiece, the model was only produced for 4 years. There were also some changes along the way. Honda went back to working on more classic inline 4s for sport bikes, which, while relatively cheaper compared to the 6-cylinder, had good performance compared to the main competitors. And the CBX 1000 took an honorable place in the pantheon of the best, most interesting, and unique motorcycles in history. Most CBX 1000 motorcycles have been preserved by their owners in their original condition. These days, it's a collector's item. There are also some interesting custom builds based on the original CBX. In 1980, the Frenchman Georges Martin from the French company Moto Martin made an attempt to improve the CBX for racing. He designed and built a new frame from nickel tubes. The frame was stiffer and lighter than the original, and the stock forks, with a steering head diameter of 37 millimeters, were replaced with Moto Martin forks with a diameter of 42 millimeters. A single rear monoshock was installed horizontally under the seat. Thanks to Brembo brakes, a one-piece fiberglass tank seat tail section, the overall weight was reduced by 36 kilograms. The British magazine Motorcycle News ranked the Martin CBX third in speed on its road test statistics chart in 1980 with a top speed of 230 kilometers per hour. And in this photo, you can see a drag motorcycle based on the CBX engine. In this case, the engine displacement was increased to 1,320 cubic centimeters. There are also a number of custom bikes in various styles built around Honda's Inline 6. That's the story, my friends, of the beautiful Honda CBX 1000 motorcycle. At this point, my story comes to an end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to support my work by being active on the channel with likes, shares, and comments. Also, if you wish to support my work financially, you can do so using the details provided in the description. See you next time.